Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 9. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Steve, welcome. We're back on the mic together again. Again, a reminder, and it'll be the last reminder to our listeners and viewers on YouTube. We're now weekly, so lots of chit and chatting going on for the rest of Season 3 and beyond. And yet another amazing guest for this episode. We have Rod Sides, Vice Chairman, Deloitte LLP, U.S. Retail and Distribution Sector Leader. And he joins us to add some great color commentary around Deloitte's recent release, his recent research release that forecasted for U.S. holiday retail sales, just blockbuster numbers. Just wow, right?
Yeah, I think 7 to 9% is what they're forecasting for the increase for the holiday, which, actually comes off of a pretty good holiday last year. So yeah, it looks like consumers, according to their forecast anyway, consumers are going to keep on spending.
Well, you're very calm about that number. I mean, if you and I were working in the retail business, we'd be happy for 7 to 9%. We'd be like, these are epic numbers. Like, yes. It's funny. We've almost become immune to these big numbers. Like, okay, I remember a stat last year or the year before when U.S. retail was going up like 4 or 5%, somewhere in that range. And I think someone said that just that growth on the size of the retail business in the U.S. was equivalent to the entire year of South Korean retail. Like, It's a big business, right? 7 to 9%. Are we just becoming a little bit blasé about these numbers?
I think there's some danger of that. Of course, as we get into some of the questions about how much of this persists, right? Pent up demand and the savings rates and all these other kind of macroeconomic factors seem to be pretty strong. But yeah, and then you got, as you go on a sector by sector basis, you have some of these, particularly the apparel retailers, post 40% increase, 50% increase. Right. So these are numbers we haven't seen before. But it's a lot easier to run a big comp when you run a huge negative comp the year before. But it's such an interesting, unusual, I dare say, unprecedented time.
Yes, not for the first time on this podcast or in many other that we've said the word unprecedented. All right, well let's jump into the news of the week. So where do we want to start? Stitch Fix. I've always found Stitch Fix a very interesting company, whether it's because they're AI driven, right. Because their management team is super savvy. Julie Bornstein, who was there for a while on their board, and their COO I've interviewed. Super savvy. Their results came out, seemed pretty good, and then it looks like a bit of a strategy pivot. Talk about your observations.
Yeah, Stitch Fix. Well, they have been a really interesting business. They were, I think, the first retailer really of any size to be so reliant on data science. I remember seeing some of their original early pitch decks where they would talk about the 150 or 200 data scientists they had and how this was going to be the source of their competitive advantage. For people that aren't familiar, Stitch Fix puts wardrobe suggestions together. Their core model is they send a fix to you on a certain schedule, and then you keep what you like and you return the rest. And they learn better to make recommendations. They have found, I guess, in the last year or two that they need a little bit more human intervention to make the predictions as accurate. So they've shifted a little bit, I guess, from being quite so reliant on pure AI. But yeah, it was a little bit of a mixed report, I guess, because as we were just talking about, we get some of these apparel players that are having 50, 60, 70% increases. And I think they were up 27% or something like that. So below the trend for apparel, but because their business isn't a physical store business, they didn't lose as much a year ago. So it's a little apples to oranges, I think, in terms of putting them in the general retail category. But they did swing back to profitability, which was been a question for them. So that was very positive. The thing that's getting a little bit of critique, I kind of think it's a little bit much ado about nothing, is they're adding the service, I believe they call it Freestyle, which is essentially regular apparel e-commerce. They're just going to be selling items through a website. But the premise is they'll be able to use this AI to make recommendations. So it's not a recommendation for a set of things, it's recommendation for individual items. So, in theory, that expands their addressable market. puts them, of course, in competition with a million other people. But I guess the secret
Yeah.
sauce is the AI. So that's another one where just announced, no results. We'll have to see. But I'm in the scheme of their business. I'm not sure it's a big expansion.
Do you consider, because I do a little bit, Stitch Fix to be like a tracker stock to the return to office trend? Because when I think of Stitch Fix, I think of them in the context of working women who want a different wardrobe to show up versus like casual wear. It's kind of casual business. You can choose. But I guess in my mind, maybe because I talk to customers, it's the working woman who, wants to easily have a new wardrobe, nothing too, dramatically new, but something new, tops, bottoms, pair of
Yeah.
shoes. And that, this recovery, is it tracking a more return to office or maybe a more return to normal, perhaps?
I don't know for sure. My impression is similar to yours, though, that it is more kind of upscale office wear, so a little bit more like a Nordstrom as opposed to certainly a Lululemon. But they do have a pretty good range of things. So they cover a pretty wide spectrum, but certainly from a price point standpoint, the average unit retails on the higher side. So it's not, from that perspective, it's not surprising that they're kind of improving more like the Nordstrom number as opposed to the massive uptake for people that are more athleisure or kind of more work from home.
Well, let's talk about a company that I don't think we've talked about in a few hours, Amazon. They were
By
a bit of
law,
a
don't we
feature.
have to talk to about Amazon in every episode?
I think by podcast law, business podcast law, anyway. But they have, I guess, released or it's leaked or rumored details around what they consider their department store strategy. What have you learned?
Well, a couple things, and again, reported. It seems like it was a pretty well sourced article, but if people might remember, there was the story a little while back about they're going to open these department stores, which I think we get into a little bit of the semantics of what's a department store, and a lot of speculation about whether it was going to be more like outlet or what have you. But this report is more that it's going to be pretty apparel centered. Much smaller, though, than your typical department store. And the two things that appeared to be new are that they're going to emphasize their private brands, which they have quite a lot of, though not certainly as well known as plenty of other national brands, and that they're
Yeah.
going to, probably no surprise, have a fair amount of technology as part of this. So like with virtual try-on rooms and these sorts of things. So I
Okay.
don't. Yeah, I mean, we're getting a little bit more details, whether it turns out to be true or not. I mean, this doesn't make me go, "Wow!" Like, I wish
Right.
I could get Amazon apparel, but I wish I could go to a store to get it. I mean, that's not in and of itself.
Yeah,
Like,
I wish I could have a robot that showed me if it's going to fit well or not. Said pretty
yeah,
much
it almost
nobody in a
feels to
retail
me,
store, right?
which is a very Amazon thing. If you think about
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I believe is they're kind of messing up Whole Foods, is they focus on what's in it for them, from an efficiency standpoint, as opposed to really what's going to be an amazing customer experience. And certainly, I got to imagine, Amazon's trying to grow its private brand because the margin's better, and private brands, I should say, because the margin's better, and the returns are probably pretty high. So if you can put in virtual try-ons and you can let people try on stuff, physically, then you're going to lower your return rates and all the reverse
So wait a
logistics.
minute. You're telling me they're going to have a department store where people can actually go try stuff on before they buy it?
Crazy. It's crazy.
Wait, what?
I know. This will never work. Yeah.
Retail pundits will be tearing that one apart. Boy, I get to try stuff on. Yeah, we'll see. I guess it's interesting, and I think it'll be, of course, a big topic for discussion in the as we, what is a department store? What does it mean? What is the future? What is a department store? Because they're all wrapped up into one question:
Yeah.
how much technology gets in the way, and how much actually increases that conversion and does something better. Again, as we always say, it's kind of like one of these legal statements we always should make as
Disclaimers.
a footnote. Never underestimate Amazon. Endless resources, super smart people.
Right.
Love that they try stuff. So all kidding aside, it's great that they try new stuff, right? Because it moves everything forward. So,
well, maybe they'll get lucky and, they open these and Kohl's stock price tanks 40% and then they just buy Kohl's. I mean, it would
I don't
be a
think they
good
need to have
investment.
the stock price collapse, by the way. I don't think they
They
need
can
to have
afford
that.
it, but I mean,
That.
they like to get a good deal. So,
yeah, who doesn't? Speaking of a good deal, my friend Calvin McDonald at Lululemon, Canadian company, as I'll remind listeners, as is my habit to remind everyone anything remotely Canadian, as a while ago purchased a part of an ownership in a company called Mirror, and then I think it was last year you just bought it outright. But there's been some changes in management that hit the news this week. Talk about that.
Well, I think we talked about Lulu's earnings a week or two ago, which were really good. But a lot of analysts picked up on the fact that they didn't really talk about Mirror. And there was some speculation that perhaps it wasn't going so well. Well, the CEO is now gone, which tends to lend credence to the idea that perhaps it wasn't really going so well. So there haven't been a lot of details. They haven't really released any information about the growth of Mirror, or whether there's any kind of like operating issues or whatever. But certainly that doesn't seem to have been a automatic match made in heaven. But the premise of it, marrying the technology, the hybrid, virtual, physical thing, seemed pretty interesting to me. Yep. But they also paid a pretty penny to acquire them. So perhaps it's not living up to expectations. But yeah, CEO is out.
Well, if we stretch our minds to think about that in the holistic sense, I wasn't really fussed one way or the other that they weren't talking about Mirror. I mean, Mirror is a rounding error on their sales. It doesn't surprise me. Like it seems that if a company is kind of in your average growth or maybe even shrinking 1-2%, they want to bring out a bright shiny object and say, "Hey, look, Mirror is doing really well." The business is fine, but Mirror. Whereas Lululemon's business is on fire, the core business is doing so well. You almost don't need to truck out any kind of bright shiny objects, because the bright shiny object is the core business. So I didn't read that much into it, but you're right. I kind of looking back on it, maybe disagreement, or maybe it's just not, as you say, whatever.
You never know. Spend more time with his family.
Yeah, that's right. I love that line. All right. Speaking of spending more time with retailers, American retailers, this out from our friends at Coresight Research, have some great, interesting anti-retail apocalypse store numbers. 4,969 store openings, 58.3% increase year over year. So yeah, there's more stores opening. Like that's a lot of, that's a big store count. So it does seem to counter. Now we should talk, or I should ask you, I should say qualitatively, a store isn't a store isn't a store. We're not talking, 100 Nordstroms opening up. We're talking some classifications of stores. Speak to your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, the mix, one is just to, and I think I may have mentioned this before. I love Coresight. Deb's been on the podcast. They did predict that 25,000 stores would close last year, and it ended up being about 8,000. So there's something they got missed it by a little bit. But I mean, there are a lot of stores opening. It's up quite a lot. I think it's maybe a record year in terms of units opening. Not the same as square footage. There's a real tilt, as there has been really for a while, to dollar stores. Dollar General in particular is like 20%. They're opening 1,050 stores or something like that. So they're a big percentage. But there's a bunch of the other, Family Dollar, as well as Burlington Coat Factory, Ross. So there's a really high concentration of the value-oriented retailers. We're not seeing department stores open, relatively few kind of mainstream retailers. So that's been a pattern, I think, for 5 or 6 years now, where the store openings are really heavily on the value side.
Yeah. Does that augur towards the and you spoke about it in your books about this decline of the middle class. As you see this bifurcation, right? High end luxury value, but Dollar General stores and these stores kind of opening up.
Well, I never miss
Just
an
seems
opportunity to talk about bifurcation. And since we have a Deloitte guest and they wrote a report called The Great Retail Bifurcation, it's a nice lead in. But yeah, I
right.
mean, I think
That's
it's
right.
it's both the collapse of the middle in terms of strategically. It's really hard to be, to not strongly go towards the emotional, experiential side, differentiated side, or the value convenience side. But it also does have to
Mm.
do with the demographics of the rich getting richer, which is pulling people up into the higher spending, the more expensive stuff, and then 80% or so of Americans anyway that are in poverty or really struggling from paycheck to paycheck. So it's an
Yeah, yeah.
affordability
The K
issue.
recovery, another Deloitte
Yes,
concept, right? The recovery
K-shaped recovery.
for some of us, the recovery for
Yes,
some of us, right?
right. So I think
Um,
that has been a shift we've seen going on for probably close to a decade. I think you could certainly make the argument that COVID has accelerated it a bit. You created more bifurcation or polarization. But
yeah.
as we'll get into with Rod, the federal stimulus and general discretionary spending has masked that a little bit. But yeah, you're not seeing too much strength in the middle and haven't really for years.
All right. Last but not least, let's talk about Kroger, great grocer, and they've partnered with Instacart to launch Kroger Delivery Now. I found this interesting for a couple of reasons. They in the U.S. partnered with Ocado, I believe,
Yes,
to
right.
launch highly automated grocery delivery. I know Ocado because Empire, which is Sobeys in Canada, is the Canadian equivalent. They've launched a service called Voila, all powered by Ocado. This, you see this futuristic
Yeah.
warehouse with a million robots zipping around. So I'm surprised. I guess I'm not surprised. You need a lot of volume for an Ocado application, and you don't need as much volume for the kind of Kroger delivery now. But is this like shipped in as much as they're going to be doing it for other people? What do you know about it?
Uh, I don't know all the details, but yeah, I think it's closer to what Shipt is doing because they will be offering it in markets where they don't have Kroger presence. So I think one is probably just testing
Hmm.
the ability to do essentially a virtual only business in some geographies, but also probably paving the way to open stores in those markets or acquire into those markets. So it's interesting. Kroger's become pretty experimental um, in the last couple of years. We need to do an episode, I think, just on the grocery business because there is so much
Yeah, yeah,
going on
yeah.
there, and the economics of the grocery business for delivery are really tough, and as you speak about this automation, so it's an interesting move. My sense is that a lot of the delivery companies, Instacart obviously being huge, um, they're trying to build this fortress and get a lot of scale. So bringing more people into the
Mm.
system, potentially leverages their economics. But Instacart's also an advertising platform. So the more
Platform, yeah.
traffic, the more volume they get, the more data, the more advertising they can sell. So it's an interesting play. It appears to be pretty
Mm.
experimental, but I think grocery industry is just going to be that's where so many interesting
Yeah.
things are going to be happening over the next year or two.
It's a great point. We probably haven't paid as much attention from a guest perspective as we could on grocery. We should start getting because so much, as you said, it's going on. It's such a big business, and so okay, I get it. So it's kind of like they've started ghost kitchens where
Yes,
there's no
that's my
physical
understanding.
stores, and it right, right, and so Instacart's got an established base of people. They go to Instacart and then choose who they're going to shop from. Now
Right.
they'll see Kroger. They might recognize the name. Um, I see. That's interesting. It's not what when I first saw the headlines. I just thought they were kind of backward integrating like Target did with Shipped.
Well, I
But
think
now I
they're doing
understand.
I think
Yeah.
they're doing both. But the particular
Ah,
test
mm, mm,
is also around. I believe it's guaranteeing 30-minute delivery as well.
yeah.
So really, I mean, this is the other area too, which is like keep pushing the convenience. Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
You know what they do. What they do with Ocado is I think Kroger does this as well as Sobeys. Is they don't guarantee 30-minute delivery, but they guarantee the window. So if you're
Right.
going, when you book a window between 2 and 3, 2:30 to 3, it's a very narrow window. It's going to be there between 2:30 and 3.
Right.
And the other thing that their promise is for Ocado is you when you order something on their site, it's there. You are 100% getting it. Whereas for some
Mm.
sites, they'll substitute away,
Right.
or
Yeah.
they'll show up and this has always been a bit of the downfall. Grocery home delivery, you ordered milk and eggs, and it shows up with no milk, and now you got to go to the corner store and get milk, and
Right.
you might as
Yeah.
well have gone anyway. The
Yeah.
downside to that, it's like one of these Russian dolls. The downside to that, you go on their site and there's no milk, and you're like, why is there no milk? Because they don't have it. So on the one hand, they don't sell you anything they don't have. On the other hand, you know, they don't have it. So it's not that
Yeah,
great.
and
Anyway.
this is why I think it would make probably multiple episodes. But there's so much complexity in getting this right, and the technology, not only the micro fulfillment part you're talking about, the
Yeah.
route
Yeah.
maximization, knowing you have the item in stock, without having to keep, when I first, just as a quick aside, when I was at Sears and we first did, and this is a million years ago now, 20 years ago, we first did reserve online. It was sort of an early version of buy online, pick up in store. Or sorry, not pick up, but inventory visibility. You could see whether it was in the store or not. We were working towards doing buy online, pick up in store, but that was the first step. Somebody could go on the website, see we got 6 drills or whatever. But because we didn't know when that person was going to show up, you wouldn't want to say you had, 6 drills when you could sell through all of them. So the IT people built this logic that we always added a couple, like the inventory model created a safety stock because we didn't have the ability to do real-time inventory, and we weren't sophisticated enough really to say, well, if we have 2, is it likely to be there when the customer turns up? So we say, well, we wouldn't say we had it unless we had 4 or something like that. But, that created a lot of inventory, extra inventory once that, because it actually got pretty good adoption back in like 2001. But it created a whole bunch of other headaches for us. So, but it was,
I did the same, you know what? I did the same thing at HBC. We created a floor. We said, once you hit 5, say 0. Because, for department store, as you know so well, a customer could pick up a drill or a shirt and put it somewhere else in the store, right?
Yes.
Like it's not gone, but it just disappears until the evening, reset of the store. Right. So it could be there. So we just said, okay, when it's 5, say 0, kind of err on the side of missing sales versus,
exactly.
Versus disappointing the customer anyway. If you're on YouTube right now, go to the podcast because then you'll hear our interview with Rod. So Rod Sides is our guest. And without further ado, let's bring him on and talk about U.S. retail and some pretty big growth numbers.